Chair. And again, I want to thank the parents, the stakeholders, and members of the community who invested time out of their busy schedules to come out and speak on such a critically important issue. What we had an opportunity to see this afternoon and what we're experiencing is what we call democracy in action. Democracy in action. And I want to thank the decorum by which all of the speakers spoke. All of the speakers spoke with the appropriate decorum, respect, and again, Madam Chair, it will continue to be the expectation of this board that such respect, such attention, and such courtesies are reciprocated throughout this process. I was sharing through the chair that of the speakers that spoke, and just as a visual, I was taking notes, writing down every yes and every no. In my second category, I'll talk about speaks to actually who the speakers represented. So of the speakers that spoke today, not those who signed up, of the speakers that signed up, showed up, and even some that were allowed to speak by board vote, of the 42 speakers that spoke, 38 recommended that the board adopts the recommendation of the hearing officer, and 4 recommended against. You do the math on that, that's 90% of the speakers that spoke recommended that the board adopts the hearing officer's recommendation of the instructional materials. Of the speakers that spoke, there were thoughts around who spoke. And there's been this narrative regarding the cacophony, regarding the rancor, and regarding, quite frankly, the representation of those who stand on either side of this particular issue. Of those who identified themselves in their roles in this community, in our schools, I looked at the percentage that were parents. Of the 42 speakers that spoke, 14 were either students or parents according to identifying themselves and who they were. That represents 36% of the speakers that spoke were either students or parents according to their identification. I think that data for me provides an opportunity to a greater extent to debunk, to denounce, and in some cases destroy this broad narrative that there is widespread opposition for the board to adopt these items. Again, we're talking about democracy in action. I respectfully, Madam Chair, reject any notion that there was any misrepresentation previously regarding this process. I try to stay fully engaged and in tune via briefings with the superintendent and his staff, via committees where we have an opportunity to discuss and dissect these items, and obviously through the board meeting of April 13th, where this item was initially approved. Be that as it may, democracy in action on this particular issue is looked at 4 to 5 tenets for me. Number 1, compliance with the law. Number 1, compliance with the law. Anyone who represents that this process in its entirety did not comply with the law, that is not a factual statement. Number 2, these materials are researched, fact-based. They're research-based evidence materials predicated on science, medicine, and the like. Number 3, this notion, this narrative around transparency. This process has been fully transparent. The superintendent and this board have embraced a very transparent, open, and obviously engaging process on April 13th and throughout, and as we saw today, this process of transparency and engagement continues. Tenet number 4, for me, parental choice. This has become a national, state, and obviously local narrative. But what I've said, Madam Chair, and my colleagues, especially those of you who have served for decades, parental choice, parental involvement, parental engagement, parental voice, that's not new. Maybe it's been repackaged, maybe it's been rebranded, maybe it's been highly politicized. But from a policy and practice-driven perspective, parental involvement, parental choice has always been an imperative of this school district, and I can attest to that as a teacher, assistant principal, district administrator, superintendent of schools. Parental choice and parental engagement has always been a fulcrum of our ethos in this district. And on this particular issue, I want to amplify that. Parents can opt out. Parents can opt out. Parents can opt out. That is consistent with our board policy. If we want to deviate from that, we have to amend the policy. And we can't amend the policy from the dais. There's a process we go through changing board policy. But current board policy allows for parent opt-out. And last but not least, I want to say this parenthetically. There was a comment made relative to state adoption. The state can make this particular topic part of the state adoption process. The state has exercised its right to choose not to. It has been allowed to be made at the local level by the school board. Many have represented that the position is to defend children. We all are committed to defending children. We all are. But we cannot defend some and deny others. The defense of some represents the denial of others. But what is democracy? Democracy is not an either-or proposition. It's a both-and. Our current policy, our current law, our current process defends parents and their children who do not want to be exposed to this. But we cannot deny parents who want to have access for their children to this critically important information. We had some data relative to how this information reverberates in certain communities versus others, from Florida City to County Line Road. So through the chair, I'll unpack it based on anecdotal, qualitative data, quantitative data today. If in fact we take that position in defending some children, we're going to defend 10% of the parents and speakers who spoke today, and we're going to deny 90% of the speakers who spoke. Again, my position on April 13th was one in which I was convinced and convicted that our position and our practice does not violate statute, it does not violate policy, it does not validate any notions and provisions around parental rights. But I think it's not prudent to move the goalposts around these particular issues for matters that really don't speak to this item. And last but not least, I would like to just cite what the item says. To accept the hearing officer's recommendation. This is not about adopting the textbooks. This is about to accept the hearing officer's recommendation. Why do we have a hearing officer involved? Because that is part of the legal, statutory, policy-driven process. So we can't say in this particular case, or we can by our vote, if I don't like the independent, policy-driven, statutorily supported outcome of an independent hearing officer's decision, relative to this issue, we're going to change some of the dynamics of what we think should or should not happen. Those parents who had an opportunity to have their voices heard through the appropriate petitions, they did. They did. And I want to summarize what it said. The superintendent appointed an unbiased and qualified hearing officer, qualified and unbiased, to deal with the timely petitions received. The hearing was held at Booker T. Washington Senior High School. Per Florida statute, the hearing officer had 14 days. The independent, qualified, and unbiased hearing officer had 14 days to review the case and make a final recommendation to petitions and supporting documentation. This was processed through the superintendent, and his recommendation through his chief academic officer is for the board to accept the hearing officer's recommendation. So, Madam Chair, as I close, I want to just say this item, this process supports policy, it supports practice, it is in alignment with procedures, it embraces the appropriate process, it is not political, and it represents and embraces the opinions, the thoughts, the choice options of parents. So for me, Madam Chair, it checks all of the boxes, and I wanted to give credence and credit, and I wanted to do this in a way that I respected and I heard the public's commentary. So these notes is what I wrote while people were talking and counting, because I want to not be predisposed to what was represented here today. Those numbers could have went the other way, but again, it does not deny parents in any shape, form, or fashion. It complies with law, research, transparency, parental choice, and again, I could never deny some children in what I'm calling defending others. It's not an either or. We have an obligation as a board to do both and relative to those things. Thank you, Madam.